A war hero came home smiling with a gold medal, only to walk straight into the most painful moment of his life. Brooklyn welcomed Staff Sergeant Michael Carter home with noise, color, and pride. Red, white, and blue ribbons fluttered along Flatbush Avenue, and a brass band struggled to stay in rhythm as the crowd cheered his name. Neighbors leaned out of apartment windows, children waved miniature flags, and old men saluted with trembling hands. At the center of it all stood Michael, 6 feet tall, broad-shouldered, dressed in a crisp military uniform that still smelled faintly of aircraft metal and foreign sand. The Golden Valor Medal rested heavy against his chest, catching the afternoon sun. It had been pinned there barely an hour earlier by a general whose voice cracked while recounting Michael's courage overseas, how he had pulled 3 wounded soldiers from a burning convoy under enemy fire, how he had refused evacuation until every man was safe. The applause had thundered. Cameras flashed. His mother had cried. Yet beneath the ceremony, beneath the honor, Michael felt something hollow. He smiled when he was supposed to. He waved when people shouted his name. But his eyes searched the crowd for only one person. Emily Carter. His wife of 4 years should have been standing at the barricade, arms wrapped around herself the way she always did when she was nervous. She should have been crying, laughing, mouthing "I'm so proud of you." Michael had imagined that moment during the worst nights of the war, Emily running into his arms, the world fading into nothing but her warmth. But Emily wasn't there. Michael told himself not to read into it. Brooklyn traffic was hell. Maybe she was late. Maybe she was overwhelmed. War made you cautious, suspicious, too alert for danger. He pushed the thought aside and let the city celebrate him. That evening, the celebration moved to a modest banquet hall near Prospect Park. There were speeches, toasts, and stories Michael barely remembered telling. His best friend, Daniel Brooks, clapped him on the back and raised a glass. "To the bravest bastard I know," Daniel said, grinning. "Brooklyn's hero." Michael smiled at him. Daniel had been like a brother since high school. They'd grown up 2 blocks apart, played ball in the same cracked courts, dreamed of leaving the neighborhood together. Daniel hadn't joined the service, but he'd been there for Emily while Michael was deployed. Or so Michael believed. By the time the night ended, Michael was exhausted. The kind of tired sleep couldn't fix. "I'm heading home," he said, loosening his tie. "Emily probably passed out waiting." Daniel hesitated, just a fraction too long. Yeah, of course." Michael didn't notice. He was already thinking about the apartment. About quiet. About his wife. The ride back to their brownstone in Crown Heights felt surreal. Brooklyn at night had changed while he was gone. New cafes, brighter streetlights, strangers where familiar faces used to be. War did that to you. It froze your memory while the world kept moving. He unlocked the front door quietly, out of habit. The hallway light was on. A woman's laugh drifted from the bedroom. Michael stopped. His instincts flared, the same instincts that had kept him alive overseas. He moved down the hallway slowly, silently, each step heavy. The bedroom door was half open. Warm light spilled out. Then he saw them. Emily was on the bed, her hair loose, her wedding ring glinting faintly as her hand pressed against a familiar chest. Daniel's chest. His best friend's face was buried in her neck. They didn't hear Michael. They were too lost in each other. For a moment, Michael couldn't breathe. The medal on his chest felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds. Emily looked up first. Her eyes widened. Her mouth opened, but no sound came out. Daniel turned. The color drained from his face. "Mike," Daniel started. Michael raised a hand. He didn't shout. He didn't move forward. He just stood there, still as stone, as if his body had decided it couldn't handle one more step. "I survived a war," Michael said quietly. His voice didn't shake. That scared him more than if it had. "I buried friends. I watched men die screaming my name. And this," he gestured vaguely between them, "this is how I come home." Emily scrambled for words. "It wasn't supposed to happen like this. You were gone so long. I was lonely." Michael laughed then. A sharp, humorless sound. "I was lonely too." Silence filled the room. Thick. Suffocating. Michael turned and walked out. He didn't pack a bag. He didn't take off his uniform. He walked through Brooklyn streets until dawn, the metal clinking softly against his chest with every step, like a reminder he couldn't escape. The next morning, he filed for divorce. Emily cried. Daniel tried to apologize. Michael listened to neither. Something inside him had shut down, a switch flipped, clean and final. Brooklyn still called him a hero. Strangers bought him drinks. Old friends slapped his back. But the nights were unbearable. Sleep came in fragments, haunted by memories of explosions and Emily's face frozen in shock. So Michael drank. At first, it was just enough to sleep. Then enough to forget. Then enough that forgetting became the goal. 3 years passed like that. The divorce finalized. Daniel disappeared from his life. Brooklyn blurred into bars, bottles, and long, empty mornings. The golden medal sat untouched in a drawer, its shine dulled by dust. It was Michael's mother who finally intervened. "You're killing yourself," she said over the phone, her voice thick with tears. "Come to London. Stay with us. Please." Michael hadn't planned to leave America. But one grey morning, with nothing anchoring him anymore, he boarded a flight and watched Brooklyn vanish beneath the clouds. He didn't know it yet, but the city he was running from would one day be the place he learned how to live again, and London would be where his heart slowly remembered how to heal. London greeted Michael Carter the way Brooklyn never could. Quietly, without applause, without expectations. The sky was a soft, uncommitted grey when he landed at Heathrow, the kind of colour that felt neither sad nor hopeful, just suspended. Rain misted the air lightly, clinging to his jacket as he stepped outside the terminal with a single duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His parents were waiting. Robert Carter, older now, his hair more silver than black, stood with his hands in his coat pockets, posture still carrying traces of the discipline he'd learned in his own younger years. Beside him, Linda Carter held an umbrella and worry in equal measure. When she saw Michael, she dropped the umbrella and wrapped her arms around him without hesitation. "Oh, my baby," she whispered. "You're home." Home. The word landed awkwardly. Michael hugged her back, stiff at first, then tighter than he intended. For a moment, he smelled her familiar perfume and felt like a child again. Before war, before marriage, before everything shattered. The drive to their townhouse in Greenwich passed in a blur of wet streets and brick buildings. London felt older than Brooklyn, heavier somehow, as if the city remembered things long forgotten elsewhere. Michael watched people hurry past cafes and bus stops, their lives moving forward without him. At his parents' home, Linda cooked too much food. She always had. The kitchen filled with the smell of roasted chicken and herbs. Michael sat at the table, nodding at questions, answering when necessary. He didn't mention the bottle of whiskey tucked deep in his bag. That came later. London didn't cure Michael. It softened the edges but didn't erase the ache. He took long walks along the Thames, hands buried in his coat, watching the river slide forward relentlessly. He told himself he was just adjusting. That once jet lag faded, once he found work, once he settled, things would improve. They didn't. Instead, the drinking followed him across the ocean. There was a pub 2 streets away from his parents' house, the Black Anchor. It was small, warm, and dimly lit, with worn wooden floors and the comforting murmur of voices blending together. The kind of place where no one asked questions and everyone minded their own business. Michael liked that. The first time he walked in, he ordered a double without looking at the menu. He drank it fast, then ordered another. He sat alone at the bar, shoulders slouched, eyes unfocused, staring at nothing. That's when she noticed him. Her name was Claire Bennett. Claire had worked at the Black Anchor for nearly a year. She was 26, with warm brown eyes that missed very little and a soft voice that somehow cut through noise when she spoke. Her dark hair was usually tied back in a loose ponytail, a few strands escaping no matter how carefully she fixed it. She saw a lot of men like Michael, quiet, heavy, carrying things they didn't know how to set down. But there was something different about him. He didn't get loud. He didn't flirt. He didn't complain. He drank like he was trying to erase himself, one glass at a time. When she set his third drink down, their eyes met briefly. "Last call for doubles tonight," she said gently. House rule. Michael nodded, unfazed. Fair enough. He left without a word. And then he came back the next night. And the night after that. Weeks passed, marked by rain and empty glasses. Michael became a fixture at the bar, always sitting in the same spot, always ordering the same thing. Claire learned his rhythm, the way he exhaled before drinking, the way his jaw tightened when laughter erupted nearby, the way his eyes darkened when a couple sat too close. She watched him carefully. One Thursday evening, the pub was quieter than usual. A football match had ended badly, and most of the crowd had cleared out early. Michael sat alone, already on his fourth drink. Claire wiped down the counter, then paused in front of him. "You know," she said casually, "you don't talk much for someone who comes in every night." Michael didn't look up. "I'm not much of a talker." She tilted her head. "Could have fooled me. Silence says a lot." He let out a breath that was almost a laugh. "You always this observant?" "Only when something's wrong." That got his attention. He finally looked at her, really looked. Her eyes held concern, not pity. It unsettled him. "I'm fine," he said automatically. Claire raised an eyebrow. "You're drinking like someone who's anything but." The words hung between them. Michael's first instinct was to shut down, to push back, to retreat into himself. But London had already stripped him bare. Maybe he was tired of pretending. He took a slow sip. "Lost my wife. Lost my best friend. Lost myself somewhere in between." Claire didn't interrupt. "Came back from the war a hero," he continued bitterly. "Turns out that doesn't mean much when the life you were fighting for doesn't exist anymore." For the first time in years, Michael said the words out loud. Claire leaned against the bar, folding her arms. "That's a lot to carry alone." "I'm used to it." "Doesn't mean you should be." Something shifted then. Not dramatically. Just enough to matter. From that night on, they talked. Not deeply at first. Small things. Weather. Music. The strange habits of pub regulars. But gradually, the walls cracked. Michael told her about Brooklyn, about the medal he never wore, about waking up in the night with his heart racing. Claire told him about growing up between London and New York, about her mother who lived in Brooklyn, about her dream of opening a cafe someday, something warm, something safe. She didn't judge him for drinking. She didn't lecture. She just listened. And somehow, that made all the difference. For the first time since Brooklyn, Michael found himself looking forward to something that wasn't the bottom of a glass. He didn't realize it yet, but the connection forming across that worn wooden bar would become the quiet beginning of his salvation. Spring crept into London quietly, almost apologetically. The days grew longer, the rain softened into something gentler, and the air carried the faint promise of renewal. Michael Carter noticed the change not because he felt better, but because Claire Bennett did. "You can smell it today," she said one evening at the Black Anchor, stepping outside the pub for a breath of air. That moment when winter finally gives up. Michael followed her gaze down the narrow street. The pavement still glistened from an earlier drizzle, reflecting amber streetlights like scattered coins. "Smells like wet concrete to me," he said. Claire laughed, light and unguarded. "That's because you're not looking for anything else." He didn't argue. He wasn't sure he knew how. By now, Michael was no longer invisible at the pub. The regulars nodded at him. The bartender trusted him to pay his tab at the end of the week. And Claire no longer spoke to him like a stranger. They talked most nights after her shift ended, sitting at a small table near the window. Sometimes she drank tea while he drank whiskey. Sometimes he drank less. That, too, was new. "You ever think about going back to Brooklyn?" she asked one night. Michael's jaw tightened instinctively, but he forced himself to answer honestly. "I think about it. I don't think I could survive it." "My mum lives there," Claire said. "Williamsburg. She moved back after my parents split." He looked at her, surprised. "You've lived in Brooklyn?" "On and off," she smiled. "Funny place. Loud. Alive. Breaks your heart if you let it." Michael nodded slowly. "Sounds about right." Their shared geography felt like a bridge, two cities, two pasts, colliding gently between them. As weeks passed, Michael began opening doors he'd kept locked for years. He told Claire about the medal, about the convoy, about the screams that still echoed in his dreams. He told her about Emily and Daniel, not with rage anymore, but with a dull sadness that lingered like an old wound. Claire listened the way only someone who truly cared could. She didn't rush him. She didn't offer clichés. Sometimes she reached across the table and squeezed his hand, grounding him in the present. One night, after a particularly heavy conversation, Michael noticed something unsettling. He didn't want another drink. The glass sat untouched in front of him while Claire talked about her idea for a cafe. Brick walls, big windows, soft jazz in the mornings. Michael watched her hands move as she spoke, the way her eyes lit up when she imagined a future. "You should do it," he said. She smiled sadly. "Dreams cost money. And courage." He swallowed. Courage. That word used to define him. Now it felt distant. That night, walking back to his parents' house, Michael realized he was sober. Fully, painfully sober. And instead of dread, he felt clear. That clarity scared him. Brooklyn began appearing in his dreams again. Not the betrayal, but the before. Emily laughing on the fire escape. Daniel tossing him a beer after a pickup game. A life he thought was solid. When he woke, the ache returned. A few days later, the letter arrived. It was official, stamped, heavy. The Department of Defense. Michael stared at it for a long time before opening it. Inside was confirmation of what he'd been told years earlier but never processed. Due to his actions and subsequent recognition, a compensation and honor grant totaling $200 million had been finalized. $200 million. The number meant nothing to him at first. It felt absurd. Useless. No amount of money could undo Brooklyn. Couldn't erase the bedroom door half open. Couldn't bring back the man he used to be. He folded the letter and placed it back in the envelope. That night, he told Claire. She stared at him in disbelief. "Michael, that changes everything." "No," he said quietly. "It doesn't change what I lost." "But it gives you choices," she replied. "And you've been living without those for a long time." He considered her words. Choices. The war had stripped those away. So had his marriage. So had the bottle. Over the next weeks, something subtle but powerful shifted. Michael started skipping nights at the pub. When he did come, he limited himself to one drink. Sometimes none. Claire noticed. She didn't comment. She just smiled. They began spending time outside the Black Anchor, walking along the Thames, visiting small bookstores, sitting in quiet cafes. Once, they crossed Tower Bridge at dusk, the city glowing beneath them. "This bridge survived bombings," Claire said softly. "Still stands." Michael looked at the river below. "Guess some things are built to last." She glanced at him, her expression unreadable. One evening, standing outside her flat, the air charged with something unspoken, Michael hesitated. "Claire," he said, voice low, careful. "I'm not whole. I don't know when I will be." She met his gaze steadily. "I'm not asking you to be." That was the moment he realized it. The feelings he'd been trying not to name had already taken root. Quiet. Steady. Real. For the first time since Brooklyn, Michael felt something other than pain guiding him forward. And that frightened him almost as much as it gave him hope. The first time Michael Carter woke up without reaching for a drink, it felt like a small miracle. Morning light filtered through the thin curtains of his childhood bedroom in his parents' London townhouse. The walls were still lined with old photographs, Brooklyn birthdays, Little League trophies, a younger Michael grinning with scraped knees and impossible dreams. For years, those memories had felt like ghosts. Now, they simply felt distant. Not gone. Just no longer clawing at him. He showered, dressed, and surprised his mother by sitting down at the kitchen table for breakfast. "You're up early," Linda Carter said cautiously, as if afraid to startle him. "Couldn't sleep," Michael replied. But not in a bad way. She studied his face, searching for signs she'd learned to recognize. Tremors, dull eyes, the smell of alcohol. She found none. Her smile was careful, hopeful. That's good, she said softly. Michael nodded, but his thoughts were already elsewhere. On Claire. On the way her voice calmed him. On the dangerous possibility that he was beginning to care deeply again. Later that afternoon, he walked through Soho, hands in his pockets, breathing in the city. He passed a pub and felt the old pull, but it was weaker now. Manageable. That was when his phone buzzed. An American number. He stopped walking. For a moment, he considered ignoring it. The past had a way of re-entering your life when you least wanted it to. But something inside him, perhaps a need for closure, made him answer. Michael, a familiar voice said, tentative and fragile. He closed his eyes. Emily. There was a pause, heavy with everything they'd never said. I didn't know if this number still worked, she continued. I heard you moved to London. Why are you calling? Michael asked, not unkindly, just tired. She inhaled shakily. I need to see you. I'm in Brooklyn. I need to explain. The city noise around him faded. Old anger stirred, but it didn't burn like before. It simmered, uncertain. There's nothing to explain, he said. You made your choices. I know, Emily whispered. And I live with them every day. But please. Just once. For closure. Michael thought of Claire's steady presence. Of the fragile peace he'd built. He also thought of Brooklyn, the city that had both raised him and broken him. I'm not coming back, he said. But I wish you well. He hung up before she could respond. That night, he told Claire everything. They sat on a park bench near Greenwich Park, the city glowing softly around them. He expected jealousy, tension, something sharp. Instead, Claire listened. You don't owe her anything, she said after a while. And you don't owe me reassurance either. He looked at her, surprised. You're not upset. I trust you, she replied simply. And I trust the man you're becoming. Her words settled something deep inside him. But the past wasn't done knocking. A week later, another message arrived, this time from Daniel Brooks. I heard you're in London. I know I don't deserve a reply. But I'm sorry. Truly. Michael stared at the screen for a long time. Forgiveness wasn't something the war had taught him. Survival, yes. Strength, yes. Mercy, less so. He typed, erased, typed again. I'm not ready to forgive you. But I'm learning how to live without hating you. He sent it. The relief was unexpected. That evening, at the Black Anchor, Michael ordered a sparkling water. Claire noticed, her smile slow and proud. You okay? She asked. I think I am, he said. For the first time in a long while. They talked late into the night. About the future. About fear. About the quiet courage it took to choose healing over numbness. As they walked back toward Claire's flat, the streetlights casting long shadows, Michael stopped. I need to say something, he said. Claire turned to face him. I don't know what this is yet, he continued. But I know I don't want to walk away from it. She stepped closer. Then don't. The kiss that followed was gentle, unhurried. Not fueled by desperation or escape, but by trust. By two people choosing presence over pain. In that moment, Michael realized something profound. The war hadn't ended when he came home. But here, in London, with Claire, he was finally learning how to lay his weapons down. Love didn't arrive in Michael Carter's life like a thunderclap. It came quietly, in measured steps, the way healing often does, almost unnoticed until one day you realize you're standing in a different place altogether. By early summer, London had begun to soften. The parks filled with people, the sky stayed light longer, and the city breathed easier. Michael found himself breathing easier too. He and Claire Bennett fell into a rhythm that felt natural, unforced. Mornings sometimes began with coffee at a small cafe near the Thames. Evenings were spent walking through neighborhoods Michael was still learning to love, Greenwich, Camden, Soho, each one revealing something new about the city and about himself. Claire still worked at the Black Anchor, but fewer of Michael's nights were spent there. When he did stop by, it was for conversation, not escape. One drink became none. None became habit. It startled him how quickly alcohol lost its hold once something better replaced it. One afternoon, they sat on the grass in Hyde Park, shoes kicked off, the distant hum of the city surrounding them. Claire lay back, staring up at the sky. "Do you ever think about what you'd do if you weren't surviving?" she asked. Michael considered the question carefully. "I don't know if I remember how not to." She turned her head toward him. "You're allowed to learn." That night, Michael went home and opened the drawer he'd avoided for years. Inside lay the Golden Valor medal, still wrapped in its velvet case. He held it in his palm, feeling its weight, not as a burden this time, but as proof of something endured. For the first time, he didn't feel ashamed of it. A few days later, he told his parents about the money. Robert Carter stared at him across the dining table. $200 million, he repeated slowly. "Michael, that's not just security. That's a life." "I don't want it to be a crutch," Michael said. "I don't want it to replace purpose." Linda reached for his hand. "Then let it support one." With their encouragement, and Claire's, Michael began to make plans. Real ones. He met with advisors, lawyers, financial planners. The process was overwhelming, but also grounding. Each decision felt like a step forward instead of a retreat. One evening, as rain tapped against the windows, Michael shared an idea with Claire. "I've been thinking," he said, "about Brooklyn." Her expression softened. "The good parts." "The parts worth saving," he replied. "I want to invest there. Community centers, housing, support programs for veterans, people who come home and don't know where to go." Claire's eyes shone. "That sounds like you." He hesitated. "And London too. I don't want to abandon the place that helped me heal." She smiled. "You don't have to choose one city. You're allowed to belong to both." The idea settled deep inside him. Brooklyn and London, two cities tied together by loss and redemption. Their relationship deepened not through grand gestures, but through consistency. Through showing up. Through honesty. There were nights Michael woke sweating, breath ragged, memories of war crashing into him without warning. Claire learned how to anchor him. Soft words, steady hands, reminding him where he was. "I've got you," she would whisper. "You're safe." And for the first time, he believed it. Months passed. Michael bought a townhouse overlooking the Thames, not extravagant, but solid. A place filled with light. Claire helped choose furniture, warm colors, plants, textures that made the house feel lived in. One evening, standing in the empty living room before move-in day, Michael turned to her. "Stay," he said. Not as a command. As a question. "With me." Claire didn't hesitate. "I already am." The words hit him harder than any explosion ever had. They moved in together slowly, thoughtfully, aware of the weight of past mistakes. Michael insisted on transparency. Claire welcomed it. They built trust deliberately, brick by brick. And then, one quiet night, Michael did something he never thought he could. He poured a bottle of whiskey down the sink. Claire stood behind him, silent, respectful. When he finished, he rested his hands on the counter, breathing hard. "It doesn't control me anymore," he said. She wrapped her arms around him from behind. "You did that." "No," he replied softly. "We did." As the city lights shimmered outside their window, Michael realized something essential. He wasn't just living again. He was choosing life and love every single day. Autumn arrived in London with a quiet dignity. Golden leaves lining the streets, cool air sharp enough to wake the senses. Michael Carter had always associated fall with endings. Deployments. Goodbyes. The slow descent into darker days. This time, it felt like a beginning. The townhouse by the Thames was no longer an empty shell. It had a rhythm now, Claire's laughter echoing down the hall, the soft hum of music in the mornings, the scent of coffee drifting through open windows. Plants thrived in every corner, stubbornly alive, as if insisting on growth. Michael found comfort in routine. He woke early, ran along the river, came home tired in a way that felt earned. No hangovers. No regret. Just breath and motion and the steady beat of a heart learning to trust itself again. The first major project began with Brooklyn. Michael stood in a conference room overlooking the East River, sunlight bouncing off glass buildings as if the city itself was listening. Across the table sat architects, social workers, and community leaders, faces lined with skepticism and cautious hope. "This isn't charity," Michael said, his voice calm but firm. "It's investment. In people who were promised a home worth returning to." They discussed veteran housing, counseling centers, job training programs. Brooklyn names came up: Bedford-Stuyvesant, Crown Heights, Fort Greene, places Michael knew in his bones. When the meeting ended, a gray-haired woman shook his hand. "Most people write checks," she said. "You showed up." That mattered to him more than any applause ever had. Back in London, Claire was building something of her own. She found a small, sunlit space near Notting Hill. Brick walls, tall windows, the bones of the cafe she'd dreamed about for years. Michael visited the site one afternoon. Dust on the floor, echoes in the air. "I can see it already," Claire said, spinning slowly. "Morning light. Soft music. A place where people breathe." Michael watched her, love swelling quietly in his chest. "Let's make it real." He didn't fund it as a gift. He invested in it, with contracts, shared ownership, respect. Claire insisted on that. "I need it to be mine too," she said. "It is," he agreed. Their evenings were filled with planning, blueprints spread across the dining table, mugs of tea growing cold as conversations stretched late into the night. They debated tile colors, menu ideas, community outreach. It felt oddly intimate, building something together that wasn't just emotional, but tangible. And yet, not everything was easy. One night, after a long day, Michael sat staring at the Thames, distant and quiet. Claire joined him, sensing the shift. "You're somewhere else," she said gently. "I keep waiting for it to fall apart," he admitted. "Like I don't deserve this much peace." Claire took his face in her hands. "You didn't steal this life, Michael. You survived for it." The words broke something open inside him. He rested his forehead against hers, breathing her in, grounding himself. Later that week, Michael received an invitation from a military foundation in London honoring international veterans. They wanted him to speak. The idea terrified him. "I don't want to be a symbol," he told Claire. "I'm still figuring myself out." "Then talk about that," she said. "Talk about coming home broken and choosing to heal." The night of the event, Michael stood behind the curtain, heart racing. He hadn't worn the medal in years. Tonight, it rested against his chest again, not as armor, but as truth. When he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. "I was taught that strength meant never falling," he began. "War taught me how to survive. Love taught me how to live again." He spoke of Brooklyn, of London, of betrayal, addiction, and the quiet heroism of choosing help over pride. He spoke of a woman who listened when he couldn't speak. When he finished, the applause was gentle, sustained, real. Afterward, a young soldier approached him, eyes shining. "I thought I was weak," the man said. "Thank you for proving I'm not." Michael walked home that night lighter than he'd felt in years. At the river's edge, Claire waited for him. "You were incredible," she said. He smiled softly. "I wasn't brave alone." She leaned into him, and as the city reflected itself in the water, Michael understood something fundamental. Foundations weren't built in moments of glory. They were built in honesty, in patience, in choosing to stay, especially when leaving felt easier. And this time, he wasn't going anywhere. The first snow of the season dusted London lightly, barely clinging to rooftops before melting into memory. Michael watched it from the window of the townhouse, coffee warming his hands, Claire humming softly in the kitchen. Peace had become familiar enough that it no longer felt fragile. Still, something tugged at him. "Say it," Claire said without turning around. "You're pacing in your head." He smiled. "Am I that obvious?" "To me," she replied, setting 2 mugs on the table. "Always." Michael took a breath. "I need to go back to Brooklyn." The words hung between them, not heavy, not sharp. Just honest. Claire nodded slowly. "I wondered when you'd say that." You're not upset. No, she said. I think you'd be lying to yourself if you didn't. 2 weeks later, they flew together. Brooklyn rose beneath them as the plane descended. Familiar blocks, brownstones lined up like old friends. Michael's chest tightened as they crossed the bridge from JFK, the skyline unfolding in the distance. It smells the same, he murmured. Claire smiled. That's how you know it's real. They stayed in a hotel near Dumbo, with views of the Brooklyn Bridge glowing at night. Michael walked the streets slowly, deliberately. Crown Heights. Fort Greene. The park where he'd once dreamed of a future that felt certain. He expected pain. What he felt instead was clarity. They toured the first completed veteran housing project. Brick restored, windows bright, laughter echoing through the halls. Michael shook hands, listened to stories, saw himself in the faces of men and women finding their footing again. You didn't just build walls, one resident told him. You gave us back dignity. That night, Michael and Claire walked along the East River, the city alive around them. I don't feel trapped anymore, he said quietly. I feel grateful. Brooklyn no longer owned his pain. It shared his growth. A message arrived the next morning. Emily. I heard you're back in town. Michael stared at the phone, then looked at Claire. You don't have to answer, she said immediately. I know, he replied. But I think I need to. They met in a quiet cafe near Prospect Park. Emily looked older. Softer. Regret had etched itself into her posture. I just wanted to say I'm sorry, she said, eyes downcast. I ruined something good. Michael studied her, searching for the anger that used to live there. He didn't find it. I've forgiven you, he said gently. Not because you earned it, but because I needed to. Tears slipped down her cheeks. I'm glad you're happy. So am I, he replied. When he left the cafe, the air felt lighter. That evening, Michael stood on the Brooklyn Bridge with Claire, the city stretching endlessly around them. I used to think love was something you held onto until it broke, he said. Now I think it's something you build, every day. Claire took his hand. You've built a lot. Back in London weeks later, life resumed with new depth. Claire's cafe opened, second light, and the neighborhood embraced it instantly. Mornings buzzed with conversation, evenings glowed warm and calm. One quiet night, after closing, Michael locked the door behind them. He took a breath, heart steady. Claire, he said, reaching into his coat. I don't want to outrun fear anymore. I want to choose us. He knelt. Her hands flew to her mouth, tears already forming. Yes, she whispered before he even finished. As he slid the ring onto her finger, the city outside blurred into something soft and infinite. Brooklyn had given him roots. London had taught him how to grow. And with Claire, Michael finally understood what it meant to come home, not to a place, but to a person. Planning a wedding, Michael learned, was nothing like preparing for war. There were no clear strategies, no fixed objectives, no enemy to outmaneuver, only choices layered with emotion. And yet, somehow, it terrified him more than any battlefield ever had. Claire, on the other hand, approached it with calm joy. We don't need perfection, she said one evening at the townhouse. Fabric swatches spread across the table. We need meaning. Meaning, Michael understood. That had become the compass of his life. They decided on 2 ceremonies, not extravagant, not performative. One in Brooklyn, where Michael's story had begun. One in London, where it had been rewritten. The Brooklyn ceremony took place first. It was held in Prospect Park, beneath tall trees just beginning to bloom. The air carried the scent of spring, and sunlight filtered through branches like a blessing. Friends from Michael's childhood stood alongside veterans he'd helped through the housing project. His parents flew in, Linda crying before the ceremony even began. Claire walked toward him in a simple ivory dress, her smile steady, her eyes filled with quiet certainty. Michael felt his chest tighten, not with fear, but with awe. When he spoke his vows, his voice didn't falter. I was trained to survive loss, he said. But you taught me how to believe in joy again. I promise to meet you in honesty, to choose healing over hiding, and to build a life where love is our first language. Claire's vows were just as steady. "I don't need you to be unbroken," she said. "I need you to be real. And I promise to walk with you, through light, through shadow, through all the becoming." They kissed to applause and tears, Brooklyn bearing witness not to his pain this time, but to his renewal. The London ceremony followed weeks later, smaller and softer, held near the Thames at sunset. The sky blushed pink and gold as vows were repeated, not rehearsed, but felt. A quiet string quartet played as the river reflected their silhouettes. Afterward, they returned to the townhouse, now fully theirs. That night, standing barefoot in the living room, Claire leaned into him. "Do you ever miss drinking?" she asked gently. Michael considered the question honestly. "Sometimes I miss what I thought it gave me. But I don't miss who it made me." She kissed his shoulder. "I'm proud of you." A few days later, Michael did something symbolic and final. He bought a large estate just outside London, sprawling green land and open sky. Not for excess, but for intention. A place for retreats. For veterans. For people learning how to breathe again. "This is for your dream too," he told Claire. "A place that gives people second chances." She looked at him, eyes full. "Then it's perfect." The estate became a sanctuary. Workshops. Therapy spaces. Gardens. Silence where it was needed. Conversation where it healed. Michael stopped introducing himself as a soldier. He introduced himself as a husband. A builder. A man learning to stay present. On quiet evenings, he and Claire sat on the terrace, watching the sun disappear beyond the hills. "I used to think happiness was loud," Michael said once. "Like applause. Like medals." Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "Some of the best things are barely audible." He smiled. Because across oceans and years of pain, he had learned something simple and extraordinary. Life didn't begin when the war ended. It began when he chose love, and kept choosing it. Marriage didn't change Michael Carter overnight, but it changed the way he faced each day. There was comfort in waking beside Claire, in the quiet certainty of her presence. Mornings at the London estate began with mist rising from the fields, birdsong cutting through the silence. Claire often walked the gardens while Michael reviewed plans for the retreat centre, schedules for therapy sessions, housing logistics, partnerships with veteran organisations in Brooklyn and London. The work mattered. Not in an abstract way, but in the way that put weight back into his hands. The estate opened officially in late spring. Veterans arrived slowly at first. Men and women carrying the same haunted stillness Michael once had. Some stayed for a weekend. Others for months. There were counselors, group sessions, physical training, and long, unstructured hours designed for one purpose: rest. Michael didn't lead with speeches. He led by example. He cooked with them. Ran with them. Sat quietly when words felt too heavy. At night, when someone woke shaking from a nightmare, Michael was often already awake, sitting with them until the storm passed. "You don't have to be strong here," he told one former Marine late one night. "You just have to stay." Those words became the unspoken philosophy of the place. Claire thrived too. She split her time between Second Light Cafe in London and the estate, bringing warmth wherever she went. She organised art sessions, music nights, small celebrations of progress that felt monumental. One evening, as the sun dipped low, she joined Michael on the porch. "You're lighter," she said. "Not fixed. But lighter." He nodded. "I don't run from the memories anymore. I let them pass." They sat in silence, watching the horizon soften. Brooklyn remained part of their lives. Michael flew back frequently. Meetings, groundbreakings, conversations that felt like circles closing. On one trip, he stood in front of a new community centre bearing a simple plaque. "For those who come home carrying more than they left with." He touched the wall, emotion tightening his throat. That night, walking through Fort Greene, he realised something startling. He no longer feared the city. It had become part of him without owning him. But healing, he learned, wasn't linear. One stormy night back in London, the past returned unexpectedly. A loud crack of thunder split the sky, sending Michael bolting upright in bed, heart racing, breath ragged. For a split second, he wasn't in London. He was back in the desert, smoke in the air, screams in his ears. Claire was awake instantly. "Michael," she said firmly, grounding him. "You're here. You're safe." He struggled, shaking, until her hands anchored him. "I'm sorry," he whispered later, ashamed. She shook her head. "Don't apologize for surviving." That night, they didn't sleep much. They talked instead, about fear, about how healing didn't mean forgetting, about how love wasn't about fixing someone, but choosing to remain present. Weeks later, Claire told him she was pregnant. The words landed softly, almost unreal. Michael stared at her, stunned. "Are you sure?" She smiled, tears in her eyes. "Very." Fear flickered, quick, instinctive, but it was followed by something stronger. Hope. "I don't know how to be a father," he admitted. Claire took his hand. "Then we'll learn together." That night, Michael walked alone under the stars, breathing deeply. He thought of Brooklyn streets, London bridges, war zones, pub counters, hospital halls, and the long road that had led him here. He placed a hand over his heart. "I'm still here," he whispered. And for the first time, he didn't say it like a question. He said it like a promise. Winter settled over London and Brooklyn in tandem that year, as if both cities shared a quiet understanding of Michael Carter's journey. Snow dusted the estate grounds outside London, and inside, the fire crackled warmly. Claire, now visibly pregnant, hummed softly while arranging a small dinner table, the scent of roasted vegetables mingling with the faint smell of fresh pine from the holiday decorations. Michael watched her from the doorway, heart swelling in a way that wasn't tied to glory, medals, or money. It was something deeper, something steady. They had built a life together, brick by brick, choice by choice. The estate had become more than a home, it was a sanctuary. Veterans who had once wandered in with haunted eyes now walked its halls with a sense of belonging. Claire's cafe, Second Light, had grown into a community hub, full of laughter and music, while the Brooklyn projects Michael funded thrived with children playing, neighbors chatting, and hope no longer confined to whispers. Both cities, once symbols of his pain and loss, had transformed under his careful hands into spaces of healing. That night, after dinner, Michael and Claire walked outside, wrapped in scarves and coats. Snow crunched underfoot as they reached the estate's pond, frozen and glistening under the moonlight. Claire rested her hand on her growing belly. "Do you ever think about Brooklyn?" she asked quietly. Michael looked out over the snow-covered fields, the Thames's distant reflection twinkling. "Every day," he admitted. "It's where I fell apart. It's where I learned what it meant to survive. But now, it's also where I know I can help others stand again." Claire smiled, leaning into him. "And here. This is where I learned how to live," he said softly. "Where I finally understood that home isn't a building. It's not a city. It's the people who hold you steady when the world tries to knock you over." She pressed her forehead to his. "We've built something good, haven't we?" "We have," he whispered. And for the first time, he believed it without reservation. In the months that followed, life settled into a comforting rhythm. Michael taught veterans practical skills, led workshops in leadership and resilience, and sometimes just sat with them in silence, showing through presence that healing was possible. Claire's touch was never far, whether she was pouring tea, brushing his hair out of his eyes, or holding his hand through moments of fear. Then, on a crisp spring morning, the next chapter of their lives began. Claire went into labor. Michael, steady and calm in a way that had once seemed impossible, supported her through every contraction, whispering encouragement, holding her hand, never leaving her side. Hours passed. Exhaustion and anticipation mingled in the sterile hospital room. Finally, a cry split the air, a strong, healthy cry. Michael felt tears prick at his eyes as he looked down at the tiny life swaddled in Claire's arms. A daughter. A miracle born of patience, love, and the courage to heal. He held her gently, as if afraid his rough hands might break the fragile perfection of her. "Welcome home," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You're safe now." Claire leaned against him, breathing heavily but smiling. "Home," she echoed. "All of us, together." That night, as the city lights of London twinkled beyond the hospital window, Michael reflected on the path that had brought him here. Brooklyn had broken him, the war had scarred him, betrayal had nearly destroyed him. But love, Claire's steadfast, patient love, had rebuilt him. Peace had been earned not through medals or money, but through choices. The choice to stay, the choice to forgive, the choice to trust, the choice to love. In the following days, Michael introduced his daughter to both cities that had shaped him. Brooklyn, with its history and resilience, and London, with its gentle beauty and promise, became the twin worlds she would grow up knowing. He realized that home wasn't a single place anymore. It was a constellation of people, memories, and shared hearts. One evening, as snow fell softly outside the estate and the baby slept between them, Michael and Claire sat together on the porch. He wrapped his arm around her, feeling her warmth, their hearts steady and synchronized. "I finally understand," Michael said softly. "All those years I thought I'd lost everything. I was just being led here, to this moment. To you. To her. To us." Claire rested her head on his shoulder. "And now you know what it feels like to stay," she whispered. Michael smiled, closing his eyes. The war, the heartbreak, the years of drinking and wandering, they were all chapters, not the end. The final chapter had begun, not with medals or money, not with pain or loss, but with love, forgiveness, and the quiet, unshakable joy of coming home. And in that moment, Brooklyn and London, past and present, sorrow and healing, all folded together into one simple truth: he was finally truly home.